Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with all of you today. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Pattern for Progress monthly housing webinar series. Our webinar series has been generously supported by NeighborWorks America. This month's topic is Moratorium on Evictions. We've got an all-star panel lined up to talk about the impacts of the moratorium on both tenants and property owners. We will also be talking about available resources and programs. Before I introduce each of the panelists, I want to take a moment to frame today's discussion. Clearly, the pandemic has caused a great deal of severely negative economic conditions across the country and throughout the Hudson Valley. We have not been spared its impacts, not to mention the crisis in healthcare, education, and the demographic shifts going on here in the Valley. Many people have lost their jobs and are finding great difficulties in making the monthly rent or mortgage payment. Businesses are also having trouble paying their rents as the economy has substantially slowed down. As a result of these uncontrollable conditions, early on in the pandemic, a series of executive orders and mandates from the national and state level were put into place. Today, we're focusing on the moratorium on evictions, and we'll also touch on the forbearance of mortgage payments. The moratorium has provided relief to tenants, but has simultaneously placed an enormous strain on investment property owners, especially the small property owners. There have been a great number of grants, loans, and rent relief programs established to assist both tenants and owners. However, these programs, as much as they are needed, are really acting as a bridge or perhaps as a band-aid for a much greater problem down the line. As well-intentioned as these programs may be, there has been great difficulties in getting the funds out on the street. There's an enormous amount of paperwork to meet all of the rules and regulations associated with these relief programs. Stimulus checks and expanded unemployment are providing support and has allowed some tenants to keep up with their rent payments. However, according to a brand new study and analysis of Census Bureau surveys, Moody's Analytics and the Urban Institute report that 18% of all renters in the United States were in arrears at the beginning of January. That's about 10 million people. These are mostly urban dwellers that are unemployed, with less income and less education, and likely to be families of color. The analysis also showed that the average past due renter is nearly 4 months behind and owes approximately $5,600 in rent and unpaid utilities. The eviction moratorium allows those tenants to stay in their homes, but does not address the issue of unpaid rent. Some programs are available, but sufficient funding is just not there. Some back rent programs, well, let's just say, again, they're really hard to get out on the street. Eventually, the rent will come due. So, what does this mean for the tenants and the property owners in the communities of the Hudson Valley region? To help understand the issues and provide valuable information and available resources to our audience, we have an incredible panel for what I hope to be a great conversation. I'd like to quickly introduce each panelist and then get right into the content of today's conversation. All of our panelists' information will be made available on our website. So joining us today is Jaime Samarel, Senior Staff Attorney with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. They provide a variety of legal services for vulnerable populations throughout the region. Tom McGrath, Senior Vice President and Director of Upstate Revitalization, is with the Community Preservation Corporation. CPC is a multi-state affordable housing lender that works throughout New York State and here in the Hudson Valley. Christa Hines is the Executive Director of Hudson River Housing, a multifaceted community development organization and a NeighborWorks affiliate based here in Poughkeepsie. Dominique Mills is the Supervisor of Catholic Charities in Ulster County. And Germain is the Vice President of Housing Services for RUPCO, a multifaceted community development agency based in Kingston, and like Hudson River Housing, RUPCO is also a NeighborWorks affiliate. So I want to begin with having each of you respond to a few questions, and then hopefully we'll have time to circle back for some follow-up remarks. Let's start with Jaime from Legal Services. Thanks for joining us today, Jaime. Appreciate it. And I'm sure you could, and I believe you have, provided at least full 1-hour sessions on the rights and the responsibilities of renters in terms of the rules and regulations on the eviction moratorium. So I wish we had a lot more time to cover all of these things, but it's important to have from you and from your perspective a grand overview. So 2 questions I'd like you to focus on. What are some of the most important elements of the moratorium? And please give our listeners an idea of what services you provide for renters. And I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Jaime.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for inviting me today. It's an honor to be with you. The newest moratorium under New York state law is called the COVID-19 Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act of 2020, or for short, SEPA. And SEPA was signed into law by Governor Cuomo on December 28th after an emergency session of the state legislature. And some of the high points are as follows. The intent of the act was to keep people, residential renters, sheltered in place until May 1st in an effort to stem the flow and transmission of the virus. It's got a very broad definition of landlord and a very broad definition of tenant, and that's indicative of the act's intention to keep people, as I say, sheltered in place for as long as possible, in this case, May 1st. It applies to evictions at all stages, beginning, middle, and end, at all times, up through and including just before execution of the warrant of eviction. Any cases that were pending as of December 28th, even those that were filed on or before March 7th, which was when the state of emergency was first declared, last March 7th by Governor Cuomo, any of those cases were adjourned administratively for 60 days. Any cases that were commenced as of December 28th for a 30-day period were also adjourned for a period of 60 days. And the reason behind that was to give individuals the opportunity to submit what is known as a hardship declaration. You can find the hardship declaration, the last time I checked, in 20 different languages on the nycourts.gov website under Uniform Court System Home for COVID-19 under the Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act of 2020. That'll be, it can be downloaded, it can be printed out. It gives individuals 2 choices. Choice A has to do with financial hardship, and being mindful of the time limits today, I would direct people towards the website, read the form in the language of their choosing, and then contact legal services if they have any questions. Keep in mind also, it's important to remember that much like when a taxi cab is pulled up in front of the house, even though it's sitting in neutral or park, the rent continues to accrue. So while people are sheltered in place until at least May 5th, it's important to remember that the rent is still accruing for each subsequent month. There are exceptions for what is known as nuisance behavior or good cause. If an individual or a member of their household is alleged to be acting in a way that is persistent and unreasonable and affecting the quiet enjoyment of other tenants or occupants, or if they pose a health hazard to other individuals. The hardship declaration must be completed, the address, the choices, A or B, sign, date. I'm advising my clients to send it back to the landlord by certified mail, return receipt requested, and by first-class mail in case the certified mailing is rejected. Any notices that go out to a tenant December 28th and thereafter are supposed to have the hardship declaration attached to it, along with a working email for the landlord, address, and phone number, and a list of free civil legal services providers in that particular area, such as Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. Under SEPA, if a warrant has already been issued, there must be a court conference before the warrant can be executed. And any warrants that go out now to the sheriff, city marshal, if you're in Port Jervis or in Newburgh, have to have certain language that an individual was provided with the opportunity to submit the hardship declaration. If that was not done, then that warrant has to be returned to the court and the eviction cannot occur. And as I say, as of right now, the moratorium is until May 1st for residential renters.
Thank you, Jaime. I do have a couple of follow-up questions before we move on to our next panelist. In your experience, and I know that you get a lot of the tenants really on who are back on their heels, so to speak, and kind of grasping at straws to some degree. Have you run into landlords, property owners that are actually working with the tenants in order to try to get them up on past arrears and or looking at paying that rent a little bit further down the line?
It's a case-by-case question, because when you say, is a landlord working with that individual, what does that mean exactly? So it's case and context specific. And by that, I mean the following. How much is owed? Are rent arrears owed for the last 14 months? Are rent arrears owed for a finite period of time, a shorter period of time? Is this landlord willing to work, as you say, with the tenant, take a portion of the arrears as satisfaction to let the tenancy continue? Or do they just want back possession of the premises? How hard of a hit is the landlord taking? Is the landlord an entity? Is it a business? Or is it a mom and pop? Is it an individual? Is it someone with a face? Someone with their own bills, their own mortgage, their own tuition to pay, food to put on the table, so to speak. I've had two cases in Middletown City Court. One was what we call a holdover that was not based on non-payment of rent. It was the end of a tenancy and notice was given and was proper notice. And there was also a secondary claim for $10,000 in back rent. Much to my surprise, through the STEP program, which is administered by my office, we have several paralegals who administer the money we get from the state. The landlord actually agreed, and I think it was a good business decision, to settle the case, took $6,000 of the $10,000 that was owed, waived the other $4,000, and the case was marked as settled, and the client, to my knowledge, is still in that apartment. We have another client who was in arrears for approximately $15,000, had paid $4,000 or $5,000, offered a repayment plan with details and specifics to the landlord, and much to my chagrin, same attorney, different landlord, that landlord chose to decline. So it's a case-by-case determination. And also, I think what's relevant is, what was the relationship between the parties before this all began? Had the individual been in court before? Was the relationship adversarial? Did the parties get along? So that's why I say it depends. That discussion leads into a case-by-case determination. And finally, we've had to become a bit more creative. And one of the things that we've done suggested, and one of my clients took us up on it, is her bargaining chip was she had filed the hardship declaration, so she was sheltered in place till at least May 1st. She agreed for me to offer the landlord, and the landlord actually took the offer. $17,000 or so was waived. Client ended up waiving her security deposit, making a payment to the landlord for the attorney's fees and a judgment for 1 month's rent, and basically paying the landlord approximately $4,000 in exchange for $14,000 in arrears waived. Now, that's, of course, case-by-case determination, and there are some tenants who would rather just shelter in place. A judgment is not an issue for them. What they're looking for is time, and time to be safe for they and their families.
Yeah, and during the winter months, obviously, to shelter in place is critically important. So, Jaime, thank you for that valuable insight and information. So you touched upon, the tenant side of it, the landlord side of it, the property owner side of it. And so now let's turn our attention to panelist Tom McGrath. Tom, you've been working all over New York State, and you've been in this business for some 3 decades at this point. And so, the economy and certainly multifamily housing has taken a hit in a majority of our markets, some worse than others. You've been working closely with the state on the creation of a pool of funds known as the New York Forward Loan Program. So I'd like for you to tell us about the program for small building owners, who's eligible, who's applying, what kind of volume and applications are you seeing, And maybe perhaps you could touch on the challenges of the program as well. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. The New York Forward program is a program that was sponsored by HCR and the Empire State Development Corp. The funds were raised by Calvert Impact Fund, enterprises involved in overseeing how the program got created and what have you. And it's for small businesses and small landlords. 30% of the funds were set aside for small landlords. There were 5 CDFIs throughout New York State that were involved in making these loans. 4 for businesses, and CPC was the lender for the landlords. The basis of the loans is for small property owners, and by small I mean anywhere from 2 units to no greater than 50, and the owners of the property can't have a portfolio greater than 200. So they're really trying to target the smaller lenders. It's a COVID-related loan amount, so the borrowers would put together for us, along with other lists that I'll come back to, of items that they would require, but where their shortfall is on their rentals. In some cases, certain tenants are not paying at all. Other tenants may be paying half of what they're paying, and we do an accumulation of what their losses are, expected to be over a 6-month period. We originally started with 3 months, and I think when the program got started, none of us really expected that this would last as long as it has. So it was extended to 6 months. Originally a $50,000 loan max, moved up to $100,000. But it's based on those number of months, the amount of rent that you're losing over the 6-month period. That would be the loan amount. And it's a 3% interest only loan for year 1, and then amortizes year 2 through 5. And for not-for-profits, it's a 2% loan. We've had over 1,000 applications, 1,100 applications to date. And this is probably back since September. 80 loans have closed to this date for $3.6 million. We typically have between 2 and 5 closings a week, thereabouts. They've been pretty well spread around the state as to where they are, but about 60% have been in New York City. Most borrowers ask for the full amount, or the $100,000, which is the cap amount of the loan that's involved. More than half of the applicants have pulled out of the program. Either they never responded after their initial contact, or once they found out it was a loan as opposed to a grant, or they just really didn't have the documentation that they were able to to put together for the program. So, there was actually 540 that had withdrawn, or they didn't qualify for whatever reason. We're still working with a lot of those borrowers, the other half of the borrowers, but they really struggle to put together all the documentation that's required. It's the vast majority of our borrowers are very small. Actually, let me just touch on that a minute, because sorry, one more second. The MWBEs represent 2/3 of the actual loans that we've closed so far, and over half of the applications that we received. And many, we have had a number of $100,000 loans, but the vast majority are $20,000, $30,000 loans, that kind of thing. Again, I'll repeat it, that most are a little upset that it's a loan, but they desperately need the help, and they're moving forward with the loan itself. The documentation isn't all that overwhelming, but when it's a small owner that might have a 2 or 3 unit building and is not sort of a regular property manager and doesn't track everything like a regular larger landlord might, or a person that may own several multifamily properties, we ask for their most recent income taxes. There's a hardship letter that would go along with it, which they just have to put together why they're having an issue collecting rents, or that they just are in fact having problems collecting rents. The rent roll, which would establish the ultimate loan amount. Part of the program requires that there is a positive cash flow on the property before COVID. Now, let me just take one step back. All these funds, I talked about Calvert raising the funds. The funds are all being provided by banks. There are several banks that have actually put up this money. So it's not government money that we could go back to and say, this isn't working, we should really do this as a grant. There's a full expectation that these loans will be repaid. And Empire State Development Court does provide partial guarantee to help offset some losses for these banks. But there's that expectation that there's a certain amount of underwriting from the banks that will be done. So we also can't just sort of say, well, you don't have to provide anything, we're just going to give you the loan. So that's why some of this comes together. So we need things like the organizational docs. Most multifamily buildings are owned by an LLC. So we need like an operating agreement, the organizational docs. We do credit checks. Their mortgages had to be current prior to COVID hitting. We expect that they may have had problems once COVID hit, or they have to be in a forbearance agreement. So they would have to provide the forbearance agreement to us. Taxes had to be current prior to COVID. So there's just a lot of accumulation that smaller owners probably don't keep their most recent mortgage payment, or certainly don't keep their last 12 months worth of mortgage payments and things like that. They provide a personal guarantee on the loan. It is not a real estate loan. It does not get secured by the real estate, so we don't have to go out to existing lenders and get subordination agreements or anything like that. It's a personal loan to the borrower. And then they sign an attestation form, attesting to all the information that they provided us is accurate. Because one of the things that we're not doing is reviewing every lease. Mm-hmm. We're taking a certified rent roll that it's accurate. We're not reviewing every expense. We're not reviewing how much did their heat cost last year or anything like that. What's provided is being taken as gospel, so that we can underwrite these loans fairly quickly, mm-hmm. turn them around, and get the dollars out to them. Where we're finding problems is just the small owners putting all this information together. Each one by itself is not a major problem, but collectively, they're just struggling pulling all of it together. So there were things that we were able to reduce a little bit. On buildings less than 10 units, we said, well, you really don't have to provide the income and expense statement, because they probably don't track the expenses as carefully as property managers do and stuff like that. So we're always looking for ways to streamline the process a little bit. There have been some ways that we've done that. And now the problems collecting rent are still with us. And many people are already beyond their 6 months. So we're talking to the state about increasing the loan amounts again, maybe around 150, and accounting for maybe 11 months of losses. We're very close to an approval on that. One of the agreements, going back to what Jaime was talking about, one of the agreements are that during the course of the loan, the borrowers are agreeing not to evict tenants based on payment. That just becomes a personal issue with some of the borrowers, because some of them have tenants that have just chosen not to pay, and it's become personal. You mentioned, Jaime, personalities and things like that, and that is a tough one for some of the borrowers to swallow. as we go through this. But for those that have received the money, I think that in the loans, they've been extremely grateful. And I really feel like in many cases, it's saving the building. Their forbearance agreements are expiring. They have the cash available to go forward. And I'll note that on all the loans that we have closed, we don't have a single delinquency, not one. Everybody is paying on time.
The last comment that you made on the fact that there's been no defaults, and that whether you look at this as a bridge or a Band-Aid, it's still a resource available that will ultimately, it'll prevent disinvestment. So these properties can be maintained in the long term, which is
Correct.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Which is fabulous. So
Great.
Thank you, Tom, very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to turn to Christa Hines now. Christa, over at Hudson River Housing, you're an owner and a developer of multifamily housing, and clearly you provide tenant resources and resident resources. So I'd like to ask you, what are you seeing in your portfolio in terms of rental payments, and describe the rent relief program that HRH is administering? What is available, and what are the challenges of the programs that you see? Christa?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here with all of you. So Hudson River Housing manages about 600 units of multifamily housing. We really specialize in supportive housing. And fortunately, we have not really seen a significant decline in rental collections. I'd say our reduction is about a 5% decline, because a lot of our tenants are on fixed incomes. So unfortunately, for them, the pandemic has had some indirect hardships. Their income might not have directly gone down because of the pandemic, but they're definitely seeing other hardships as a result, like increasing medical expenses and food costs and things like that. So we're really fortunate that our rental collections haven't really taken a significant hit. But I will say, though, Tom talked about this a little bit. We are seeing a few tenants, despite our efforts around education and care management and property management, they're somewhat taking this moratorium as I don't want to say as an excuse, but we do have a few folks. We have about 30 or so about 5% of our tenants that are not paying their rent just because this moratorium is here. And, on one side I can see, they're very low income. They are struggling in other ways, so I can somewhat understand, but I'm definitely concerned when this lifts, that those folks are gonna be faced with definitely a hardship. I will say, Joe, you asked about some of the struggles that our clients are facing. So it's not really so much of an income struggle, I would say. It's really much more on the stress and anxiety that the pandemic has really caused. I mean, this is going on a year now. So, many of the folks we serve are already struggling with a lot of challenges. They're very low income, so poverty is an issue. They, have other issues. Mental illness is a big factor. And, it's been a year, and a lot of folks still aren't able to access the services that they need, in-person therapy, and it is still limited. Obviously telehealth is a great option for people, but it's not the best for a lot of folks. So people are really struggling, and I'd say isolation is a huge issue. Even in our multifamily buildings where, we have other tenants, obviously, people are really staying to themselves because that's, basically what they're told to do for medical reasons. And just that isolation is really hard. They're not able to see family. They're not able to see supports that have been really keeping them going. So that's a huge issue. I'd also say, the whole homeschooling thing, we have a lot of we serve a lot of families, and, that adds a whole layer of stress onto these, already stressed families, is having to provide that, education and be there. So we have put Wi-Fi in a lot of our facilities just to assist with that, which has helped a lot, but that's another stress. And, I'd say the decision about whether to take the vaccine has also become a stress factor. A lot of people would think that the vaccine is the solution, but a lot of the folks we serve are struggling with that and aren't really sure if it is a solution. So we're doing a lot of education around the vaccine so people, have the information that they need to make an informed decision. So that's just our clients. I will say we're hearing from other residents. We have a housing resource center that we run, so we talk to people that are facing other housing challenges in the community. And I will say that rising housing costs are starting to really hurt people. We're getting a lot of calls from people that are saying, that my landlord's raising my rent or trying to raise my rent, and that's a huge concern, because especially in Poughkeepsie, our vacancy rate is so low. There's really nowhere for people to go if their rents are raised and they are on limited income. So that's a huge, huge issue that we're trying to work through. So in terms of the rent relief program, we've been doing a ton of stuff on rent relief. When the pandemic first hit, we actually launched our own rent relief it was called emergency response. So it wasn't just rent relief. It also helped with utility expenses and some food expenses and things. And we were able to do this. It was about $100,000. We received money from FEMA and from private donations. The community really came out in support. So we have been accepting applications all throughout 2020. We received about 300 applications totaling about $500,000 of need. So, we had 100,000. We allocated all about 100,000, but obviously it didn't come close to hitting the need. But fortunately, in the very beginning of 2021, we got additional resources from the state. We got 140,000 from the state. So we put that money out. We received another 150 applications requesting almost the same amount. $480,000 was requested. So we're going through those applications right now. And so in addition to those two programs, we have 3 other programs that we're in the process of administering. So there's a ton of stuff going on. The state has their own, or had their own, I should say, direct rent relief program that was available through February 1st. The window is now closed on that, but we were helping people apply directly to the state for rent relief. And the latest rent relief is the Dutchess County allocated money to Hudson River Housing, about $1.2 million that they were allocated. So we're in the process of putting that money out. And the city of Poughkeepsie also has a program of some funds. So when all in all, we had about $1.4 million to allocate in rent relief. And that's great. But, as I've already mentioned, we received already almost $1 million of requests in a very short window. And we're nowhere near the moratorium being lifted, and people are still obviously in need. So we're very concerned about what is to come. But we're hiring 4 people to help us with this because it's a ton of work. It's a lot of work on the applicant's part. They have to obviously provide proof of a COVID loss of income, which is very hard in a lot of cases for folks. They have to work with their landlord to produce, obviously, proof of residency, their lease, all their income docs. It's a lot for people, and they're already in a stressed situation. So we're really trying to help people through that process.
Sure. Thanks, Christa. I thank you and all of these frontline workers. I mean, what you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis is absolutely incredible. But just slightly off topic, but not really. Every January, community-based organizations do something that's called the point-in-time count, and that's to assess the homeless individuals, homeless families throughout the region, throughout the country. And I'm curious, what did you see in January with the point-in-time count?
That's a great question. I didn't even really touch on the homelessness work that Hudson River Housing does. We operate the only homeless shelter in Dutchess County, and we've seen our numbers really increase. We're serving about 115 people on a nightly basis at the shelter. And we are hearing from a lot of other folks because we do street outreach. Obviously, we participated in the point-in-time count as well. There are a lot of people that aren't using the shelter for a variety of reasons that are, unfortunately sleeping in very unsafe situations. Some actually, on the street and in other, vacant properties and things. So the numbers are great, and unfortunately, they're really only increasing. I mean, we have been seeing this trend for years now, but the pandemic really just exacerbated it, because a lot of the folks that we serve were able to, stay with family or friends, couch surfing and that kind of thing, and that just isn't available to a lot of people anymore, because families just aren't comfortable, taking people in. So it's been hard, very hard.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate all of the great insight. And so let's take a drive over the river from Dutchess over to Ulster County. And Dominique Mills from Catholic Charities, I've got a couple of questions for you. First, tell us about the programs that you're operating at Catholic Charities, and what are the major housing challenges that are faced by your clients, probably similar to what Christa has described. And then lastly, are you seeing property owners willing to work with tenants? Dominique, I'll turn it over to you.
So good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me. So here at Catholic Charities in Ulster County, we have a variety of services that we provide to the community. We have a client choice pantry where families and individuals can come and access our food pantry as if they were shopping in a supermarket. It gives a sense of dignity. They get a shopping cart, and there's usually a volunteer that can assist them with the shop at the pantry. So we're very proud of that. We also have a kids pantry where we provide formula, diapers, wipes, clothing for children. So we have families come in, we have individuals come in, dads come in. We also have bags that we give away in the kids pantry for expecting moms. So if you're experiencing a hardship, if you're expecting a baby, you can come in. We have also had community baby showers where we give baby showers to moms that are in the community who may not have the ability or access to receive gifts or things that are needed for their upcoming birth. We're very excited about that, and it goes over well. Here at the center, we also have what we call social safety network services, and those services provide case management. We also have rental assistance, utility assistance. We have immigration services here. We also have a STR-based, a peer-based opioid program at the center. We have a CYO program. We have a beautiful gym where we provide athletics and things like that to kids in the community who need an escape from the environment. We have a basketball program. We have a variety of different sports programs here. Due to COVID, of course, things have been put on hold, but fingers crossed, and we're hoping in the near future we'll be able to open up those sports activities again. We also have a parish counseling network that we can refer to in this time of COVID where people are feeling really stressed out. Even staff sometimes are stressed out, that we can make a referral to so people can call and get some of the mental health needs addressed that may be plaguing them. We also have a mobile pantry that we visit seniors at the senior centers, at the senior residences who are not able to access our pantry due to COVID and due to transportation issues. We have a mobile van that goes out and we take food to the seniors. We also participate in what's called Project Resilience here with Ulster County government and the Emergency Food Collaborative, where we deliver food to families who are in need, who due to COVID or other reasons are unable to come and access our pantry. What happens is they can call into a hotline, give their name, family, makeup, and we pack the bags, and we have volunteers that go out into the community to make these deliveries. We also have just included pop-up pantries that we have. So again, we go out into the community and give away produce, groceries, and things like that. And that's a collaboration with the food bank of the Hudson Valley. And we're very proud to be a part of that system. So here at the center, we do offer a variety of services. We also not located at the center, but we are in charge of the Ulster County Warming Center here, where we provide emergency shelter to people who when the temperature drops 32 or below, are in need of some type of housing. And that's at 80 Elmendorf here in the city of Kingston, but it serves all of Ulster County. So if someone was in Ellenville and found for the evening that they were unable to stay any place, they can call their local police department and we would collaborate to have them come and spend the evening or a couple of evenings here at our warming center. So those are just a few of the services that we offer here at the center. And last but not least, we have a community garden that we started, and we grow vegetables that we in turn donate back to our food pantry so that people can see that, farm fresh things that are grown here go directly back into the pantry.
It's an incredible amount of programs, Dominique. You ran through, I don't know, 15 or 20 different things. That's fantastic, and thank you for doing all of the hard work that you're doing on the front lines every day.
Thank you so much.
But you mentioned a lot of food pantry programs, and I'm curious to know, on television I see it all the time, the face of the people who are food insecure. It appears to me anyway that it has changed. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing the same thing in Ulster County?
Absolutely. So we have seen a change, and I do see many of my peers, who I would say my peers are people who, worked, amassed savings, things like that. And due to COVID, loss of income, or people that were living check to check, and now that COVID hit, they're not able to be employed. It doesn't look like what would be assumed, a person coming to the pantry. People have in their mind, if someone is accessing the pantry, they may be at the poverty level, but not necessarily so. We see across the gamut. We see people that are at the poverty level, and then we also see people who have worked their entire lives, and because of this loss of a spouse or loss of an income due to COVID, now find themselves accessing our food pantry. And we are happy to serve, anyone in need.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dominique. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kathy, last but not least, thank you for being so patient.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here.
So, like Christa, Kathy, RUPCO is operating some rent relief programs, and much like Hudson River Housing, you're a full service community development corporation. So, I'd like to hear from you. Same kind of questions. What are the challenges that you're facing in the administration of all of these rent relief programs, and also as a developer and owner and manager of multifamily housing? How are the collections going on your end? So I'll turn it over to you, Kathy.
Okay, well, I might as well start with the portfolio and the collections. We really have not seen a significant reduction in rent collection. And that might have something to do with the fact that the housing is actually affordable for the people who live there. And I'm sure it's not that way across the board. So most of our resources for rental assistance have come through community development block grant funds. We reallocated some funds at the county level and assisted 52 households. And we're just finishing up a City of Kingston program, a little bit smaller, where we're helping 24 families. We really focused in on people that had arrears of 1 to 3 months. So we capped our assistance at 3 months, and we were surprised to see the number of people that only needed that $2,500. We really thought, because the Kingston one we ran in November, so we really thought we were going to see much higher rents or past due, but that really wasn't the case with the applicants. So I'm hoping that says something, that there will be a group of people that with that assistance maybe got behind, but maybe now they're self-sufficient and they're able to move forward. So one of the challenges, I think, for tenants is what we discovered through the programs is there's a high number of people that are on month-to-month leases, which to me says that their housing is really not that secure if they're literally on a month-to-month lease basis. The second challenge was really the documentation collection that was required, because like Christa said, in addition to the proving the COVID hardship, proving a reduction in income, then the landlord had to provide documentation that supported the tenant documentation. I can say that we have gotten very high response from the landlords that we served. Most were more than happy to sign certifications and provide paperwork. And we are also, like Christa said, supported the state rental relief program. Now that the application window has closed on that, we are assisting people that didn't quite have the right documentation to try to get them back in the system. So hopefully they will be approved for something. But there's certainly not enough money to cure folks. And I don't know if we really understand the full scope of what's going to happen when the moratorium does end.
Thank you so much, Kathy. One quick follow-up that I'd like you to explore with us. In terms of mortgage forbearance, I know that RUPCO operates, and Christa, you, Hudson River Housing, you also operate these massive home ownership programs, which are fabulous. And I'd like, Kathy, for you to touch on how, on the mortgage side of it, is it going for homeowners? Because you're dealing with first-time home buyers. And as they go through financial literacy and really that whole home buyer education process, you're building their capacity, over a period of time. And then something like this hits, and it's extraordinarily difficult to be ready. So what are you seeing on the homeownership side?
So on the homeownership side, I think the real estate market has been the largest challenge. The northern migration from metro areas up and seeing 30% real estate price increases from 2019 to 2020. I believe our inventory went from 5.6 months down to 2.8 months within that same time frame. Now, having said that, we're still closing loans. So people are able to get through the program. They are finding houses. From October through December, we had 17 closings. So that's pretty good. And we have a robust pipeline. I think everybody being home got people starting to think about the space that they're in, and they want to be in a different space, a bigger space. So our pipeline coming in of people wanting to become home buyers have been very strong. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. On the forbearance end, basically when COVID hit, all a homeowner had to do was contact their servicer directly, and there would be an automatic forbearance. We, on a couple occasions early on, tried to interject ourselves in that transaction to make sure that the forbearance terms were good or what they were, so at least the homeowner understood that. And it really was a transaction between the homeowner and the servicer. So now that these forbearances are starting to sunset and loans are going to have to come into modification, I'm not sure if homeowners understand that the escrows that their mortgages are paying or the homeowner's insurance may be forced placed because that's expired, that though in addition to modifying the mortgage, those past escrows are going to have to be paid off in a shorter amount of time. So we have a little bit of a concern come September, October, how people are going to be able to respond once forbearances start to end.
Sure. Hey, Kathy, you and I had talked about that a couple of months ago, and I had given some thought to a potential solution. And you mentioned the real estate pricing itself has gone up over the past year, and we're seeing double-digit increases. In fact, up in Columbia County, year over year, it's been $100,000 increase in the median price of a home. But I think there may be one silver lining in the increase in the value of a home, in that many first-time home buyers are what you call, not to get into the weeds too much, but they are over 80% loan to value. So they owe more than 80% of what the home is worth. And they have to pay something called private mortgage insurance, which is PMI. And with the increase in value of the home itself, perhaps there's a way that borrowers could have a broker's opinion or a new appraisal done, and that value then would eliminate, because the value goes up, it would eliminate the fact that a PMI is due. And in many cases, that could reduce their monthly payment by as much as $80, $100, $120 a month. So as these new escrow formats are going out, and the increase on taxes and the forbearance, maybe some of it could be essentially a wash if the PMI goes away. So just one potential solution to an enormous issue that's going to be faced by many people. And I wanted to circle back to Tom on one thing, but before I do that, Christa, what are you seeing on the homeownership side in Dutchess County?
Yeah, I mean, Kathy kind of summarized a lot of the same stuff that we're seeing. I think people are just sort of waiting. We're not getting a ton of calls at this point right now. I mean, we were, early on. But yeah, we're very concerned, as Kathy said, for all those same reasons of what's going to happen come the fall when a lot of these expire.
Sure. And Tom, I'd like to circle back to you. Both Christa and Kathy indicated that their rent collections on the properties that they're owning and managing has really been fairly okay. We'll put it that way. There's a low vacancy, but they are subsidized. They're not necessarily subsidized with a rent payment, but the construction and things have been subsidized, and people are paying 30% of their income. It's a fixed income, so things are stable to some degree. All of the lending that CPC does and all of the underwriting on, all of the multifamily homes or buildings, I'm curious what you're seeing on that underwriting side, rent collections on properties that are not necessarily a low-income housing tax credit development.
Right. I'm really kind of shocked and surprised at how well our portfolio is performing. We service about $3.5 billion worth of loans, and we have somewhere in the vicinity of about $100 million that are in forbearance. And on a percentage basis, 100 million sounds like a lot, but on a percentage basis, it's not. And borrowers that are in forbearance are maintaining their forbearance agreement. The actual delinquencies is not really that high, people that are not actually paying their mortgages. So we have looked a little further through our mortgage staff to see if they can reach out to borrowers and say, okay, you're paying your mortgage, but really what are your collections like? And most of them are reporting around a 92% collection. Where we're actually seeing weakness is in the low-income housing tax credit deals. They're paying their mortgages, they're not paying, but they're having a much tougher time with collections. And I think it's just, maybe it's the nature of the work of people that were living in the tax credit deals and things like that. Those are the jobs that were hit the hardest, and they're probably struggling the most. But we really expected, sort of a tidal wave of problems. And And not that it's perfect, but it's surprisingly good.
And Tom, one quick follow-up. A lot of work that you do in the larger cities of the Hudson Valley, primarily in Westchester County, there's a lot of revenue that comes into a building from the office space, from rent, from retail space, things like that. Is that impacting the underwriting for CPC?
Yes, that's especially underwriting going forward. Pretty much the multifamilies that we have in construction that are getting to leasing, they're leasing right up. We really haven't had any problems on the leasing side, and it could be that the pressure on rents is helping that, because I think the contractors want to make sure that they do rent up. They're not looking to get the top dollar. But commercial is definitely an issue, and we're seeing our construction loans stay on our books a little longer than usual, and they're not converting to the permanent loan. And in some of those cases, it could be the commercial lease up. So on the front end, on the underwriting, we're looking at that very, very carefully. And as we speak, we're getting even more granular. In certain cases where we think that the retail is weak, we may be underwriting it at a 50% discount, or existing tenants and a high vacancy rate on the yet to be leased space. So we're looking at that carefully, but now we're trying to get a little bit more granular and actually look at the tenancy that's in the space right now, to see what kind of troubles we would have, or the targeted tenancy that we would have. It's not the best time to open up a restaurant. And, some of the spaces that we have are just like unbelievably suited for a restaurant. So we have to look, before you might have targeted that as the best space and maybe the highest price space, whereas now we're discounting that even further. So yes, it's very much on the forefront of our minds on the commercial, Joe.
So originally I had on my notes to ask this crystal ball moment question, and I'm a little hesitant to ask. And you may or may not want to answer this question, because it's kind of difficult. What do you see happening as the moratorium ends, back rent becomes due and payable? Do you feel that tenants or property owners will actually just walk away? And what do you feel the implications are of that? So let's just kind of go around the room. Jaime, we'll start with you.
Well, I maybe it's 20 plus years doing what I do, but I think I have pessimism ingrained in my DNA by this point. I don't see it. I see it being worse before it gets any better. And one of the things that we had talked about in the housing unit at Legal Services, and we have weekly meetings from all the offices, is that you have to keep in mind the tenor of the judge that you're going to be in front of. And I think even going back to last year, I've always found that the judges, for whatever reason, find themselves, and again, I talked earlier, or I may have mentioned about you can't, all tenants, all landlords, but many judges, I think, find it easier to put themselves in the place of the landlord than they do the tenant. So I think we've got an uphill battle in the best of times. What's going to happen now with landlords who have inarguably been hurt economically because of the duration of the pandemic? I think you're going to find judges, justified and otherwise, ruling in favor of landlords. And I think agencies like mine and tenants who go unrepresented are going to have a very difficult time in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Jaime. Kathy, over to you.
So I do agree that when the moratorium ends, and I don't think we understand the scale. I haven't really seen, the documentation on forbearances and or, back month's rent. But I think we're prepared for just about anything right now. And we just hope that the resources that are at the state level through the CARES funding finally flows down to the counties, so each county can respond appropriately to meet their needs.
Thanks, Kathy. Dominique.
I agree with Kathy and Jamie. I think it's going to be rough in the beginning because of just the onslaught, but I hope that with the CARES Act, because Catholic Charities is receiving some of that funding, we'll be able to assist the families that come to us for assistance. But I do think initially it's going to be a lot to handle, but we're ready. Like Kathy said, we're ready. We have a game plan, and we're just going to do what it is that we do, and that's help the community as best we can.
Sure. And Christa?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, especially Jamie's comments about landlords. I mean, I think that landlords have been hurt, and they're going to really look to, be made whole. And it's not just a financial thing. I go back to some of the behavior issues that I know even as a landlord that we're facing. And, I'm just worried that landlords, and this is where I think legal services, is really, really important. They're going to want to get rid of some problem tenants and attract some higher income folks because they can. I mean, right now the market is so hot that they're going to really look to take this as an opportunity to evict some people to get other folks in. And, I'm really concerned about the rising costs. I said that earlier, but I think tenants are in for, we're going to see a wave of evictions when this lifts, regardless of the rent relief, because I think it is more than just a financial thing. And I'm really worried about the foreclosures because there's not a lot of relief for homeowners. So really worried about foreclosures as well.
Thanks, Christa. And finally, Tom, any closing remarks?
I agree with everybody. I don't think we really have a grasp on this tidal wave of evictions that's coming down the pike. I'm hoping that a stimulus package might be available for tenants that have really been hurt, which would offset some of that. So fingers crossed on a stimulus package. But, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I guess you could say the crystal ball is a little foggy.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Well, thank you all so very much. And, appreciate all of the day-to-day work that you all do, as I keep saying, in the trenches, because you guys are the ones that are facing it all day long, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you all once again for participating as panelists in this month's webinar on housing. To close, I also want to thank our general sponsor of NeighborWorks America, and I'd like to thank the investors in the Patterns Center for Housing Solutions, which includes Howard Hanna Rand Realty, the Carney Group, Community Preservation Corporation, RUPCO, Hudson River Housing, Leviticus Fund, Baxter Development, and TD Bank. And please tune in next month for our continued conversation on housing. In this fall, we will be having another annual housing forum. So thank you.
Be part of the solution. Join. Become a member. Subscribe. Join our mailing list to stay in the know. Attend our events and virtual panel discussions. Sponsor. Become an event sponsor to support our programming. Participate. Get involved in a pattern initiative like Fellows and Lift HV. Invest. Support pattern initiatives you're passionate about through an annual investment. Donate. Make a charitable contribution to support Pattern's work. Connect with us.